Ilara wore the weight of the gala like a borrowed coat, 2 sizes too large and fashioned from lead. The emerald gown, a sheath of silk Marcus had chosen, was supposed to be a statement, a declaration of their arrival. To her, it felt like a cage, its boning architecturally precise in its confinement. She stood just beyond the main throng, in the relative quiet of a marbled alcove, watching him. Marcus was a master of ambient light, positioning himself where the chandeliers caught the gold of his cufflinks and the practiced sincerity of his smile. He was accepting congratulations for a building he had not designed, a building whose bones she knew intimately, for she had drawn every line, calculated every stress load, dreamed every curve into existence on sleepless nights fueled by black coffee and a desperate need to create something true. He had not stolen her work in one grand act of villainy. It had been a slow erosion, a series of casual appropriations. It started with him presenting her sketches as our initial concepts in meetings. It progressed to him saying, "I decided on a different direction," when he was merely describing a solution she had devised the night before. It culminated in this: the Sterling Prize for Architectural Innovation, awarded to Marcus Vail for the Helios Tower, a structure that was her soul rendered in steel and glass. She was credited in the program, a footnote under Project Contributor. It was the architectural equivalent of being thanked for typing the manuscript. Her silence had been his greatest asset. He had mined it, extracted it, and sold it as his own quiet genius. For years, she had mistaken her endurance for strength, her quiet for peace. She had told herself that the work was what mattered, not the credit. But seeing him preen under the flashbulbs, his hand casually resting on the silver trophy that should have been hers, she understood the lie. The work could not be separated from the worker. To deny her credit was to deny her existence. The exhaustion was no longer a dull ache in her bones. It was a physical presence, a second person standing beside her in the alcove, whispering that it was time to leave. Not just the gala. Everything. Her bag was already packed in the car, a single suitcase with her sketchbooks, her laptop, and 3 changes of clothes. It was a ridiculously small collection to represent a decade of her life, but everything else felt contaminated by his touch, his influence. She had a plan, or the ghost of one. Drive north, find a small town, rent a room and breathe air that didn't taste of his cologne and her compromise. It was a fragile, terrified sort of plan, but it was hers. She watched him scan the room, his eyes flicking past faces until they landed on her. The smile tightened. It was a summons. She did not move. He tilted his head, a gesture that looked like a question to the outside world but was, to her, a command. "Come here. Adorn me." She gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. This was the first brick she was laying for her new life, a foundation of refusal. His face did not change, but a coldness bloomed in his eyes. He excused himself from the circle of admirers, his movements fluid and predatory. He did not rush. He was performing, even now, playing the part of the attentive partner. He reached her side, his fingers closing around her upper arm. His grip was a careful calibration of pain, just enough to be felt, but not enough to leave a visible mark on the skin his chosen dress displayed. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was a low murmur, a velvet blanket over a bed of nails. "I'm tired, Marcus. I'm going home." It was not the whole truth, but it was a start. "Our home," he corrected, his thumb pressing into the soft flesh of her arm. "We're not leaving. This is my night." My night. The words hung in the air between them, shimmering with an arrogance so pure it was almost beautiful. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate. He had not updated the file. He still believed her silence was acquiescence, her stillness surrender. "No," she said. The word was small, but it felt like a tectonic shift inside her. "It's your night. I'm going." He pulled her from the alcove, his grip tightening as he steered her toward a glass door that led to a secluded terrace. The cold night air was a shock against her heated skin. Below them, the city sprawled, a galaxy of indifferent lights. "Don't make a scene, Alara," he hissed, the charming facade finally cracking. "Let go of my arm." Her voice was steady. It surprised them both. "You have an obligation," he said, his face twisting. "You are my partner. You will stand by my side, and you will smile, and you will act like you are proud of me." "I can't do that," she replied, looking not at him, but at the reflection of the room in the glass behind him. A distorted, glittering world of strangers. "Because I'm not." The hand connected with her cheek. It was not a slap. It was a strike, hard and deliberate, meant to punish and to silence. The sound of it was swallowed by the thick glass and the city's hum. Her head snapped to the side, her ear ringing with a sudden piercing tone. The shock was a white flash behind her eyes, followed by a profound and terrible clarity. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply brought her hand up to her face, her fingers tracing the blooming heat on her skin. This was the final invoice for her silence, the cost she had been deferring for years, and it was too high. "Now," he said, his breathing ragged, his composure shredded. He grabbed her arm again, harder this time. "You will go back inside, you will fix your face, and you will do exactly as I say." He was panicking, not because he was sorry, because he was caught by his own temper, by her unexpected defiance. "Take your hand off her." The voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a low, calm tone that cut through the ringing in her ears and the frantic thumping of her own heart. It was steady as iron wrapped in silk. Both she and Marcus turned. A man stood in the doorway to the terrace, a figure framed by the warm light of the gala. He was tall and impossibly still, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. He held a crystal glass of what looked like water, the ice within it perfectly clear. He was not performing. He was not posturing. He was simply present, and his presence changed the entire composition of the night. Marcus, caught off guard, blustered. "I'm sorry. Do you know who I am? This is a private conversation with my wife." A lie. They were not married. Another appropriation. The man took a slow step onto the terrace. He did not look at Marcus. His eyes, a shade of gray that reminded Alara of a winter sky, were fixed on her, on the red mark on her cheek, on the terror she was trying so hard to conceal. "I know who you are, Mr. Vale," the man said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You are a guest in my building, accepting an award my foundation sponsored, and you are putting your hands on a woman who has asked you to stop." He took another step. The air grew thick, heavy with a kind of pressure she had never experienced. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. "I will not ask you again." Marcus, for the first time, seemed to understand the terrain he was on. He was a bully, and bullies operate on a calculus of perceived power. His calculations were now failing spectacularly. He dropped his hand from Alara's arm as if it were burning. "There's been a misunderstanding," Marcus stammered, trying to reassemble his mask of charm. It was like watching a man try to glue together a shattered mirror. The man's gaze finally shifted to Marcus. It was utterly devoid of emotion. It was the look one might give an insect. "There is no misunderstanding. Security." He had not raised his voice, yet two men in dark suits materialized from the doorway as if summoned from the shadows. They moved with an efficiency that was both terrifying and beautiful. There was no wasted motion. "This man's invitation is revoked," the calm man stated. "Escort him from the premises. Ensure he collects his belongings and does not return." Marcus's face cycled through a series of emotions. Disbelief, rage, and finally, a pathetic, pleading panic. "You can't do this! I won the award! The press—" "The press," the man interrupted, his voice dropping even lower, "will be told you were taken ill. A quiet exit is the last courtesy I am extending to you. I suggest you accept it." The security men flanked Marcus. They did not touch him, but their proximity was a promise. Marcus looked at Alara, his eyes begging for her to intervene, to smooth this over, to do what she had always done, to absorb the impact. She met his gaze and said nothing. Her silence, once his tool, was now her shield. Defeated, Marcus allowed himself to be led away. His swagger had evaporated, leaving behind a stooped, diminished figure. The terrace was suddenly quiet, the only sound the distant siren song of the city. Alara stood frozen, her hand still pressed to her cheek. The man, her rescuer, had not moved. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" he asked. She couldn't find the words, so she just nodded. It was a lie. Nothing was all right. Everything was broken. But something new was beginning to push through the cracks. "My name is Julian Thorne," he said, as if it were a minor detail. She knew the name, of course. Thorne Consolidated owned half the city, including this very tower. He was not just a guest, he was the sovereign of this glass and steel kingdom. He gestured with his glass back toward the party. "I imagine you don't wish to return to that." She shook her head, a small, sharp movement. "I have a private lounge on the penthouse level," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a solution being presented. "It's quiet. My car can take you wherever you need to go from there." He paused, his gray eyes searching her face. "You will be safe." Safety. It was a word she had not truly considered in years. She had aimed for survival, for quiet endurance. Safety felt like an impossible luxury. Yet, standing in the presence of this man, whose stillness felt more powerful than Marcus's most theatrical rage, she felt a flicker of it, a fragile possibility. She finally lowered her hand from her cheek. "Okay," she whispered. The word felt like a surrender and a victory all at once. He led her not back through the gala, but through a discreet side door she hadn't noticed. It opened into a private elevator, all polished steel and soft, indirect lighting. The ride was silent. He stood on the opposite side of the car, giving her space. He did not look at her, but she felt his awareness of her, a quiet, protective field. The elevator didn't ascend with a lurch. It was a smooth, silent glide, as if the building itself was bending to his will. The doors opened directly into the lounge. The room was an exercise in understated power. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking God's-eye view of the city. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and arranged for conversation, not for show. A long, dark wood table dominated one side of the room, surrounded by a dozen empty chairs. The air was cool and smelled faintly of leather and clean, filtered air. "Please," Julian said, gesturing to a pair of deep armchairs near the window. "Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" "Water would be nice," she managed, her voice still thin. She sank into one of the chairs, the soft leather sighing as it took her weight. The emerald dress suddenly felt garish and absurd in this quiet, serious space. He poured her a glass of water from a crystal carafe on a side table and handed it to her. His fingers did not touch hers, but she felt the warmth radiating from his hand. He took the opposite chair, sitting not in a relaxed posture, but with a focused stillness, like a predator at rest. "I've been following your work for some time, Miss Alara Vance," he said, and her head snapped up. "My work?" she asked, bewildered. "I'm just a contributor." The lie was automatic, a reflex honed by years of self-effacement. A flicker of something, disagreement perhaps, crossed his face. "I don't think so," he said. "I first noticed your signature on the preliminary drafts for the renovation of the St. Jude's Children's Hospital wing 5 years ago. There was a structural elegance, a way of integrating light into load-bearing walls that was unique. Then I saw it again in the schematics for the Coastal Resilience Project in Brighton, and again in the early concept sketches for the Helios Tower." Alara stared at him, her heart beating a frantic, uneven rhythm. He was not talking about Marcus. He was talking about her. He had seen her, the ghost in the machine. He had recognized her hand, her mind, in the work that had been officially stripped of her name. It was the most profound form of recognition she had ever experienced. It was disorienting, terrifying and wonderful. How? She whispered. Those were internal documents. They were never published with my name. I make it my business to know who is truly responsible for the things I admire, he said simply, as if explaining the most obvious fact in the world. Vale's public presentations never matched the sophistication of the underlying designs. He spoke about the building's skin. The original sketches spoke about its bones. I have been waiting for the architect of the bones to step forward. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and unwelcome. They were not tears of sadness, but of a dizzying, overwhelming relief. The kind of relief that comes from being found after being lost for a very long time, to be seen correctly. It was a powerful, destabilizing force. She took a shaky sip of water. I was leaving him tonight, she confessed, the words spilling out before she could stop them. My bag is in my car. I was going to drive north and disappear. Julian nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. Disappearing is one option, he said. Another is to stay and build. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity a palpable force in the room. Marcus Vale will not bother you again. My legal team will be in touch with him in the morning to formally dissolve whatever professional arrangement you had. They will also be filing a restraining order on your behalf, should you wish it. He said this all with the calm finality of a man reading a weather report. But the firm, she started. The projects, everything is in his name. Names can be corrected, Julian said. Ownership can be transferred. Contracts can be voided. The world you lived in an hour ago was governed by his rules. You are not in that world anymore. It was too much to process. The violence on the terrace, the silent intervention, this quiet room at the top of the world, this man who saw the truth of her work. It felt like a dream, and she was terrified of waking up. I don't know what to do, she admitted, the confession costing her a piece of her pride. For tonight, you do nothing, he said. You rest. I have a residence in this building, unoccupied. It's secure. You can stay there for as long as you need. No one will have the address. No one will know you are there. He saw the hesitation in her face, the fear of accepting a new form of dependence. It is not a gift, Miss Vance, he added, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. It is an investment. Talent like yours should not be sleeping in a motel in a town you've never heard of. It should be working, creating. I have a project I'd like to discuss with you when you're ready. An investment. The framing of the offer shifted everything. He was not offering charity. He was offering a partnership, a professional arrangement. He was treating her like what she was, a highly skilled architect whose abilities had value. My car, she said, her mind catching on a practical detail. My things. Give me the keys, he said. It will be brought to the private garage. Your bag will be waiting for you in the apartment. He stood, a clear signal that the conversation was, for now, concluded. He was not rushing her, but he was guiding her toward the next logical step, removing obstacles before she even had to name them. She found her small clutch purse, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. She pulled out the single key and handed it to him. He took it, his hand enclosing hers for a brief, startling moment. His skin was warm, his grip firm and dry. It was not a gesture of intimacy, but of transaction, a transfer of trust. Come, he said. I'll show you the apartment. The residence was 2 floors below the lounge, accessed by the same private elevator. It was not a home. It was a sanctuary. It was vast and minimalist, furnished in shades of gray, cream, and charcoal. The dominant feature was a 2-story window that offered the same stunning view as the lounge. It was beautiful, impersonal, and above all, safe, a blank canvas. Her single suitcase was sitting by the door, as promised. The kitchen is stocked, Julian said from the doorway. He did not step fully inside, respecting the boundary of the space he was giving her. The security panel is by the door. Only my keycard and the one I'm about to give you can access this floor. If you need anything, my assistant's number is on the console. His name is Arthur. He is efficient. He held out a slim, black keycard. She took it. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, she said, the words feeling inadequate. Julian, he corrected gently. He held her gaze for a long moment. Get some rest, Ilara. The world will look different in the morning. And then he was gone. The elevator doors closed with a soft sigh, and she was alone. The silence that descended was absolute. It was not the tense, watchful silence of her life with Marcus. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. She walked to the window and looked out at the city that had, just hours ago, felt like a monument to her failure. From here, it looked like a promise, a field of possibilities. She touched her cheek, the sting of Marcus's hand now a dull ache. It was a reminder of the price of complicity, a price she would never pay again. The next few days passed in a strange, insulated haze. Ilara slept more than she had in years, deep, dreamless sleeps in a bed that felt like a cloud. She explored the apartment, which was less a living space and more a perfectly curated gallery of calm. She ate simple meals from the well-stocked kitchen. She did not turn on the news or check her phone, which she had left in her car and had not asked for. It was a period of deliberate disconnection, a recalibration of her own internal systems. On the third day, a package was delivered by a silent courier. It contained a new encrypted laptop and a burner phone. A note in a crisp, clean hand was attached, a secure line. Arthur has the corresponding number. JT. She booted up the laptop. The only file on the desktop was a heavily encrypted folder labeled Project Nightingale. The password was a single word, provided in the note, Bones. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in what felt like a decade. Inside were architectural renderings, geological surveys, and preliminary budgets for a building that took her breath away. It was a proposed biomedical research institute, a campus of interconnected structures that blended seamlessly with a restored wetland environment. It was ambitious, complex, and beautiful. It was a problem she wanted to solve. She spent the next week working. The part of her mind that had been dormant, the part that saw the world in lines and light and load-bearing truths, roared back to life. She filled the apartment's large glass coffee table with tracing paper, her sketches spreading like a living vine. She forgot to eat. She forgot to sleep. She was not just designing a building. She was rebuilding herself, one confident line at a time. Julian did not visit. He did not call. He gave her space, a gift she valued more than any other, but his presence was felt. Every morning, a tray appeared outside her door with fresh coffee, pastries, and a copy of the day's architectural journals. Arthur, his disembodied voice on the phone, was a miracle of efficiency. When she needed a specific drafting program, it was installed remotely within minutes. When she requested physical models of the site topography, they arrived the next day. She was being given every tool she needed to succeed, with none of the suffocating oversight she had grown to associate with collaboration. Their first meeting since that night was a week later. He invited her to dinner, not at a restaurant, but in the penthouse lounge. When she arrived, the long, dark table was set for two at one end. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned as she entered, and his face broke into a small, genuine smile. "I see you've been busy," he said, nodding toward the portfolio she carried. "It's a fascinating project," she said, her voice steady and professional. She was no longer the frightened woman from the terrace. She was an architect. "The integration of the laboratory spaces with the natural water filtration systems is genius. But I have some notes." They spent the next 3 hours talking about the building. He was not an architect, but he understood the language of structure, of systems, of intent. He listened to her ideas with a focused intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. He challenged her on certain points, not to undermine her, but to understand her reasoning more deeply. It was the most stimulating conversation she had ever had. "You've addressed the structural challenges," he said at one point, looking over a sketch she had made on a napkin. "But you've also made it beautiful. You've found the poetry in the concrete." She felt a flush of warmth spread through her chest. "That's the point, isn't it? To find the place where function becomes art." "For you, it seems to be," he said, his gray eyes holding hers. As the evening ended, Arthur appeared with a folder. Julian took it and pushed it across the table to her. "A few updates," he said. Inside was a series of legal documents. A restraining order against Marcus Vale had been granted. A civil suit had been filed on her behalf, claiming authorship and seeking damages for the Helios Tower and 6 other major projects. Attached was a list of depositions from junior architects and draftsmen at Marcus's old firm, all attesting that Ilara was the primary and often sole designer. The final document was a press release from Thorne Consolidated. It announced that Marcus Vale had resigned from his firm, citing personal reasons. A quiet, corporate execution. "How did you get them to talk?" she asked, her voice hushed. "People are often willing to tell the truth when they are no longer afraid of the consequences," Julian said. His partners were leveraged. The junior staff were offered better, more secure positions at other firms. "The truth is simple, Ilara. It's the lies that require so much maintenance." She looked at him, at the quiet, unshakable power he wielded. It was not the performative, hollow power of Marcus, built on noise and intimidation. It was a deep, quiet, structural power. He did not need to shout. He simply changed the foundations, and the buildings of his enemies crumbled. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said. "Marcus will get desperate. He is a cornered animal, and cornered animals are predictable. He will make a mistake. And we will be ready for it." The mistake came 2 weeks later. It arrived in the form of a countersuit delivered by a process server to the Thorne Tower lobby. It was a laughable, pathetic document filled with blustering accusations. Marcus was suing her for intellectual property theft, claiming she had stolen his designs and was attempting to pass them off as her own. He was demanding an injunction to stop her from working on any new projects. It was a desperate, foolish gambit meant to intimidate her, to drag her into a messy, public battle where he believed his charisma and connections would win. He misjudged the situation entirely. He was not playing against Ilara, the silent partner. He was playing against Julian Thorne, a man who treated lawsuits like a particularly dull game of chess and who owned the board. "He seems warm," Julian commented dryly, reading the document in his lounge. Ilara was sitting opposite him, a half-finished sketch of the Nightingale Project's atrium on the table between them. "He's burning his last bridge," she said, a strange sense of detachment settling over her. She was not afraid. She was annoyed. It was an administrative hassle, a distraction from the real work. "Let the legal team handle the paperwork," Julian said, dismissing the lawsuit with a wave of his hand. "We have more important things to discuss." He gestured out the window. "My mother is hosting a family dinner on Saturday, at the estate. She is, the final approval on all major Thorne endeavors, including lead architects. I would like you to be there." Ilara's stomach tightened. The thought of it was terrifying. A family dinner. An approval. It felt like a test she was not prepared for. I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You are the most capable person in every room you enter, Ilara," he said, his voice firm. "You have simply been convinced otherwise. This is not a test. It is an introduction." He paused. "Besides, Marcus will eventually find out where I live. He will likely try to make a scene there. I would prefer to have that confrontation on my own terms, in a controlled environment, with you by my side." It was a strategic decision, not a romantic one. And yet, the words "with you by my side" echoed in the quiet space between them. It was a statement of alliance, a partnership. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'll be there." The Thorne estate was not a house. It was a geographic feature. A long, winding drive through acres of ancient woodland led to a sprawling stone manor that looked as if it had risen from the earth itself. It was old money, the kind that was so secure it had no need for ostentation. The power here was in the age of the trees, the thickness of the walls. Ilara wore a simple charcoal gray dress of her own choosing. It was elegant, severe, and comfortable. It was her armor. Julian had picked her up himself, driving a quiet, dark sedan. He wore a dark blue suit, and the silence in the car was comfortable, companionable. As they walked into the grand foyer, a woman descended the main staircase. She had Julian's gray eyes, but where his were calm and observant, hers were sharp and assessing. Her white hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and she wore a simple but exquisitely cut black dress, adorned only by a string of pearls. This was Isabella Thorne, the matriarch, the final approval. "Julian," she said, her voice crisp and cool. She kissed his cheek, then her eyes landed on Alara. The assessment was swift, brutal, and dismissive. She took in Alara's simple dress, her quiet demeanor, and her lack of obvious pedigree. "And this must be the architect." The way she said the word made it sound like a curio, something her son had brought home to show her. "Mother, this is Alara Vance," Julian said, his voice even. "Ilara, my mother, Isabella." Ilara extended a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mistress Thorne." Isabella ignored the hand, her gaze sweeping over Alara one last time before turning back to Julian. "We're having drinks in the library before dinner. Your cousin is here. He wants to talk to you about the Port Authority bid." She swept past them, a queen in her own court, leaving Alara feeling like a petitioner who had already been denied. Julian's hand found the small of her back, a brief, reassuring pressure. "She's already annoyed," he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "She gets that from you." Alara almost laughed. The dry wit was unexpected, a small spark of warmth in the chilly atmosphere. Dinner was an ordeal. The dining room was vast, the table a long, polished expanse of mahogany that could have seated 30. Tonight, there were 8. Julian, his mother, his cousin, his aunt and uncle, a family lawyer, and a senior board member, and Alara. Julian placed her to his right, a position of honor that did not go unnoticed by his mother, who sat at the head of the table. The conversation was a dance of power, money, and influence. They spoke of shipping lanes, hostile takeovers, and political appointments. Alara remained silent, listening, observing the intricate web of relationships. She felt utterly out of place, a field mouse at a convocation of eagles. Isabella Thorne directed several pointed questions at her, inquiries about her schooling, her family, her previous firm, each one designed to highlight her perceived inadequacies. "A small technical college in the Midwest?" Isabella remarked, her eyebrow arched. "How practical." "It had an excellent structural engineering program," Alara replied calmly, refusing to be baited. Julian deflected the worst of it, steering the conversation back to business, but the message from his mother was clear. Ilara did not fit. She did not have the right background, the right name, the right way of being. The breaking point came with the dessert course. The conversation had turned to the Nightingale Project. Julian was describing the scope of it, the vision. "It's a legacy project," the family lawyer said approvingly. "It will be the cornerstone of the Thorne Foundation for the next century." "And Julian intends to give the lead design to this young woman," Isabella said, her voice dripping with disdain. She did not look at Alara, but spoke as if she were not there. "A person with no reputation, no significant public commissions to her name, who has just extricated herself from a messy and rather public scandal." A tense silence fell over the table. "She is the most qualified architect for the job," Julian stated, his voice dangerously quiet. Isabella laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "Qualified? Julian, be serious. This requires a world-renowned name, someone with gravitas. She doesn't belong at this table, let alone at the head of a billion-dollar project." The words struck Ilara with the force of a physical blow. It was a perfect echo of the dismissal she had endured her entire life. For a moment, the old silence threatened to reclaim her. The instinct to shrink, to disappear, was overwhelming. But then she looked at Julian. He was looking at her, his expression unreadable but steady. He was not going to fight this battle for her. He was waiting for her to fight it herself. He had given her the tools, the safety, the space. But the final step, the act of claiming her own worth, had to be hers. Before she could speak, a commotion from the foyer interrupted the tense standoff. A butler appeared in the doorway, his face pale and flustered. "Apologies, Mistress Thorne, Mr. Julian. There is a man at the gate, a Mr. Vale. He insists on speaking with Mistress Vance." A cold dread washed over Alara, but it was quickly replaced by a strange, fatalistic calm. Of course. This was the mistake Julian had predicted, the desperate act of a cornered animal. "He seems to have poor timing," Julian noted, placing his napkin on the table. "Let him in." Isabella looked at her son, aghast. "Julian, absolutely not! We will have him removed!" "No," Julian said, his eyes fixed on the doorway. "Let him come. It's time we cleared the air. All of it." Marcus strode into the dining room a moment later. He had tried to make himself presentable, but there was a wild, desperate energy about him. His suit was slightly rumpled, his hair askew. He ignored everyone else and fixed his gaze on Alara. "Alara," he said, his voice attempting a tone of pained reason. "You need to come home. You need to stop this madness. These people are using you." Alara looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time without fear. She saw a weak, hollow man, a performer without a stage. "I am home, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the silent room. His face contorted in rage. "You owe me. Everything you are, I made you. That prize," he pointed a shaking finger at no one in particular, "was for our work. You have an obligation to me." He took a step toward her, but Julian rose from his chair, a silent, immovable object. He did not say a word, but his movement was enough to halt Marcus in his tracks. Julian looked at Marcus, and then at the assembled table. "Mr. Vale has filed a lawsuit claiming Alara stole his intellectual property," he announced calmly. "He feels he is the true architect behind the Helios Tower." He then looked down the table at the family lawyer. "Arthur sent you a file this afternoon, Robert. I believe it's time you shared its contents." The lawyer, a silver-haired man named Robert, opened a sleek leather portfolio. He cleared his throat. "As of 9 a.m. yesterday, Thorne Consolidated, through a series of subsidiary acquisitions, has become the sole owner of Vale Architecture, including all its assets, intellectual property, and outstanding debts." Marcus stared, his mouth agape. You can't." "I can," Julian said quietly. "As the new owner of your firm, I conducted a full audit of its digital archives. It's amazing what you can find in old server logs." He nodded to Robert again. "We have time-stamped original draft files for the Helios Tower and every other major project from the last 7 years," Robert continued, his voice dry and precise. "Every single one was created on Miss Vance's workstation, under her user profile. Your profile, Mr. Vale, shows access logs only after the core design work was completed, primarily to change the name on the title block." The air left Marcus's lungs in a whoosh. His face went from red to a pasty, sickly white. "Furthermore," Julian added, his voice like chips of ice, "your firm was leveraged to the hilt. You took out massive loans to fund your lifestyle. As I now own your debt, I am calling it in. All of it, effective immediately." He picked up his water glass and took a slow sip. "Your homes, your cars, your accounts, they are all mine now. You are, to put it in terms you might understand, entirely and irrevocably ruined." Marcus crumpled. It was not a slow collapse. It was a structural failure. His legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees on the expensive Persian rug, his body shaking. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears of pure, unadulterated panic, not at Julian, but at Alara. "Alara, please," he sobbed, the sound ugly and raw. Tell him it was us. We were a team, please." Alara looked down at the man who had stolen her work, her voice, her peace. She felt nothing, not pity, not anger, not even satisfaction, just a vast, empty distance. "The work was mine," she said, and with that simple truth, she sealed his fate. Julian made a small gesture. 2 security men, the same ones from the gala, entered the room. They gently but firmly lifted Marcus to his feet and escorted him out, his sobs echoing in the grand hall before being cut off by the closing of a heavy door. A profound silence settled over the dining room. No one moved. No one spoke. Julian turned his attention back to the table, his gaze landing on his mother. Ilara Vance is the architect of the Helios Tower. She is the mind that I have been searching for to build the Nightingale Institute. She is my partner in this endeavor. He then did something that stunned the entire room. He walked to the head of the table where his mother sat. He gently pulled back the ornate, high-backed chair. Isabella, confused, stood up. Julian then walked back to Ilara. He took her hand and led her from her seat, past the astonished faces of his family, to the head of the table. He pulled out the chair, the seat of power, his mother's chair, and held it for her. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, his voice soft but resonant with authority. The head of the table, the lead architect. Ilara looked at the chair and then at him. This was it, the culmination of everything. It was more than a gesture, it was a coronation, a public declaration of her value, her place. She sat. The chair felt like a throne. From this vantage point, she could see everyone. She was no longer a guest, she was a presence. Julian did not take his mother's vacated seat. Instead, he took the chair Ilara had just left, the seat to her right. He was now in the position of advisor, of consort. The power dynamic of the entire room had been redrawn in a single, quiet act. Isabella Thorne stared, her face a mask of shock and dawning comprehension. She had misjudged everything. She had seen a quiet, unassuming woman and mistaken her for a weak one. She had seen her son's interest and mistaken it for a whim. Now she saw the truth. She saw the unwavering steel in her son's eyes, and she saw the quiet, unshakable dignity of the woman he had placed at the head of her own table. Slowly, Isabella walked to the empty seat beside her son. She sat down. She looked across the polished mahogany at Ilara. The coldness in her eyes had been replaced by a reluctant, grudging respect. "I apologize, Miss Vance," Isabella said, her voice clear and formal. "I was mistaken. Welcome to the family." Ilara met her gaze and gave a small, graceful nod. "Thank you, Mistress Thorne." There was no triumph in her voice, only a quiet, earned peace. The rest of the dinner was a blur. The family, following their matriarch's lead, began to engage Ilara with genuine curiosity, asking intelligent questions about her vision for the Institute. She answered them with the confidence and clarity she had always possessed but had never been allowed to show. She was not performing. She was simply being. Later that night, as Julian drove her back to the city, the silence in the car was different. It was filled with a new kind of energy, a shared understanding. "I don't leave because things become complicated," she said quietly, looking out at the passing trees. It was something she had wanted to say to Marcus years ago. She said it now to Julian, a promise to him and to herself. He reached over and placed his hand over hers on the seat between them. His touch was warm and steady. "I know," he said. When they arrived back at the tower, he walked her to the door of her apartment. He did not try to kiss her. He did not try to come in. He simply stood there, his presence a comforting weight. "The project is officially yours," he said. "The contracts will be drawn up tomorrow. Full creative control. Unlimited budget." "Thank you, Julian," she said. "For everything." "I did very little," he countered. "I simply opened a door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." He held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent conversation passing between them. Then he nodded and left. Ilara stepped into the apartment. It no longer felt like a temporary sanctuary. It felt like a home. Her home. She walked over to the coffee table, which was still covered in her sketches for the Nightingale Institute. She picked up a pencil, the familiar weight of it a comfort in her hand. She looked out the window at the city lights, at the Helios Tower gleaming in the distance, a monument to a past she had finally reclaimed. She thought about the long years of silence, of making herself small to fit into someone else's world. She thought about the sting on her cheek and the cold terror on the terrace. and she thought about the quiet, steady man who had seen the architect of the bones and given her a foundation to build upon. A slow exhale, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, settled deep in her chest. It was the feeling of rightness, of being correctly placed. The weight was gone. She was not a survivor anymore. She was a creator. She turned back to the blank sheet of paper and began to draw. The first lines of a new life, a new legacy. Hers.